Happy Monday, everybody. Hope you're all doing well. We're on to week 5 of Final Fantasy, and I feel like the data is starting to really kind of, settle down. The meta's kind of getting figured out just in time to get, shaken up by Edge of Eternities coming out in basically 2 weeks. So this will be the last meta review that I do for Final Fantasy. Then I'm going to take a little bit of time to nerd out about Edge of Eternities during the early access, and then, we'll be back to doing the usual schedule come rotation. So last Sunday, I did my rotation guide. If you guys are curious about how to hit the ground running before the Edge of Eternities standard rotation, take a look at that video. I hope it is helpful. And I also did some of the sealed plan, qualifier plan, which was fun. I think the Final Fantasy set is a really good limited set. A lot of fun. So with that, though, enough rambling for me. Let's get started. What I do, in case you're new here, is I talk about the top 8 performing decks from Diamond to Mythic according to a third-party tracker called Untapped. So MTG Joe does a similar thing, picking the best performing decks from Diamond to Mythic, individual decks as opposed to archetypes. So between the two of us, you actually get a pretty decent spread about what's going on. I also try to talk about what you should look for in your opening hand, as well as the matchups for the archetypes. And the goal of this is to familiarize yourself as quickly as possible if you are new or returning to the best of one meta. And then I will also talk about the standard challenge winners in Magic the Gathering Online or any of the large tournaments that happened over the weekend as a way to keep a track of what is going on in best of 3. Now, it's going to be a little bit more specific to those tournaments as opposed to the MTG Rebellion, which does more of a widespread of what's happening in best of 3. And if you don't know their channel, I highly recommend it. I recommend both channels, really. So we're all trying to help each other out, I think. So anyway, let's get started. So top number 1, according to Untapped, in number 1, tier 1, mono red goblins. The reason why this one didn't, it skipped a week, right? We talked about it during the week of the ban in week 3, and then week 4 it wasn't in the top 8, and that was largely because mono red goblins is not a particularly popular build on the ladder. So the sample size was too low. I think literally Tuesday last week, mono red goblins snuck up into the top 8, started showing up again, right? So this one has no changes from the list that we talked about during week 3. So I'm going to skip over that. I assume that you're relatively familiar with mono red goblins. It's been around since Foundations and Aether Drift. We've talked about it a fair amount. But if you're new, right, so the matchups, it's favored against Izzet Prowess, Dimir Midrange, and Mono Black Midrange. So if you're coming up against a lot of stuff that has interaction, similar to Selesnya Rabbits, this deck is a good one to go for. It's a coin flip, though, against Azorius Control, so it does give you a little bit more sustainability against the control, whereas Selesnya Rabbits is 30-something% against Azorius Control. So it's a little bit more resilient to the sweeper strategy. And then it doesn't really have any bad matchups right now. That's why mono red goblins is looking like the number 1 deck right now, is that it's nothing that's particularly weak to. So the opening hand, you're looking for the Seer Slicer Goblin. This one's really nice because it spawns that 1/1 if you're able to attack. You're looking for the Howl Squad Heavy. This one is really nice for giving your other goblins haste, allows you to slam a Krenko on turn 4 and immediately tap it. You've also got the Runedvelt Hordemaster. Now this guy is rotating. I think it's the one card in this list that is rotating, and probably a good substitution for it is the Dropkick, the Goblin Lord on 3, Dropkick Bomber. Because playing this out, it doesn't need to happen on turn 2. A lot of times you've got other 2-drops that you're looking to play anyway, and you'd rather slam this guy to make a big board bigger, right? So definitely something I think that we'll see mono red goblins post-rotation. Anyway, if you want more rotation stuff, go look there. And then you're also looking for the Burnout Bastronaut. This is the number 1 way of enabling your Seer Slicer Goblin on turn 2. Because of the menace. Basically unblockable on turn 1. So they have to shoot it. All right, get into the rhythm of it. That was a little slow. My apologies. I'm a little rambly today. All right, so number 2, according to Untapped, is Selesnya Rabbits, also in tier 1, meaning it's statistically comparable, has the same, within the same standard deviation as far as the win rate goes. It's also no changes from last week. This is a very popular deck. I think if you look at the general trend, it was mono black immediately after the bans, followed by Izzet Prowess, and then Selesnya Rabbits has started to become the number 1 popular deck. Obviously, it depends on where you are in the ladder. but that's been the general trend. So Selesnya Rabbits is favored against the Izzet Prowess, Dimir Midrange, Mono Black Midrange, Golgari Midrange, and Mono Green Landfall. So the first half of it, all because similar to Mono Red Goblins, it punishes anything that's using single point interaction or removal, whereas the Mono Green Landfall, this one just has a faster clock. And then also the Mono Green Landfall is a little bit of a glass cannon because, like, if you use the Shelter by Ghost to get rid of the Hydra or to get rid of Bristly Bill, it can kind of stall, right? So the opening hand, this one we've talked about a lot. So Valley Might Caller, Paw Patch Recruit, the Ace Archer, and Valley Quest Caller are the ones that I recommend looking for in your opening hand. All right, number 3 is Rakdos Aggro, and this one's also in Tier 1. No changes from last week. Someone is always going to say this shouldn't be Rakdos Aggro. It just is a way to denote... You could call this Mono Red Fling if you really wanted to. There's no changes on this list, though, so it's favored against Izzet Prowess, it's favored against 5-color Reanimator, it's favored against it's coin flip against Azorius Control, and then it's weak against Mono Black Midrange, Dimir Midrange, and Golgari Midrange. So whereas Selesnya Rabbits and Mono Red Goblins are resilient to the removal, this deck is not. This deck folds to that. But the upside of this one is that it is pretty fast, right? So anything that's trying to win on like turn 4 or turn 5, Rakdos Aggro is still winning on turn 3. At least some of the time. So the opening hand, you're looking for the Slick Shot Show Off, you're looking for the Monastery Swift Spear. This one is rotating. Go look at my video for what I think should replace it. Turn Inside Out, and Cacophony Scamp, which is also rotating. Now, the most important cards in this deck, though, are the Slick Shot Show Off and the Turn Inside Out, so Rakdos Aggro will be alive in some form post-rotation. Number 4, according to Untapped, is Mono Red Aggro in Tier 2. No changes since last week. It's favored against Izzet Prowess and Azorius Control and Mono Green Landfall. It's a coin flip against Golgari Midrange, and it's weak to Mono Black Midrange and Dimir Midrange. So similar to Rakdos Aggro, it struggles against the single point interaction. And the opening hand, you're looking for the Hired Claw. The Screaming Nemesis has become a little bit more important now that we have less 1s and 2s to really focus on with the removal of the Heartfire Hero and Monstrous Rage. Still, Monastery Swift Spear is one of the better cards that you can start with, and then Emberheart Challenger is the 4th one that I look for in my opening hand. All right, number 5 here is Azorius Control, also in Tier 2. Again, all of these decks are something that you can take to Mythic. If it's in Tier 1 or Tier 2, it doesn't really matter, so I wouldn't be too fixated on that. It really just depends on which deck you're most excited to play, because you need to play a fair amount of games to get hit to Mythic, right? So I think that's more important than if you are 1 or 2% over the long run, right? You're also always going to have bad stretches and good stretches. So this one is no changes since last week. It's favored against Mono Black Midrange and Mono Green Landfall. Also Selesnya Rabbits. It's a coin flip against Izzet Prowess, and it's weak to Dimir Midrange and 4-color Dinosaurs. So there's a little bit of variation on what's being played in Azorius Control. The opening hand data, like the opening hand suggestions, are not like... Control doesn't have as much of a linear strategy of like Selesnya Rabbits is kind of like, can you answer my Valley Might Caller, right? Azorius Control is much more reactive, right? So if the meta is completely made up of one deck, then I can recommend opening hands for a week, right? This time, you're really the only card that I can say for certain that you should look for in your opening hand, and by no means should you mulligan hard for this, is No More Lies. No More Lies affects pretty much every strategy that you come up against. Whereas something like Temporary Lockdown is going to be great against Selesnya Rabbits, it's going to be basically a dead card against other Azorius Control matchups, or like Mono Black Midrange, anything that's able to put one big threat that the Temporary Lockdown has to answer. So you could say it's good to have in your opening hand, depending on the matchup, right? So the more reactive of a strategy, the less straightforward what your opening hand guide should be, right? But do keep in mind, card advantage is important in Azorius Control, so don't mulligan too heavily, and try to think about, don't use No More Lies to counterspell something that you would have wiped with your Temporary Lockdown, right? Try to be good about counterspelling the stuff that your Wraths like Day of Judgment and Ultima and Temporary Lockdown don't hit, and that will be my big beginner tip to mastering Azorius Control. Okay, number 6 is the first new archetype, if you will, Mono Green Landfall. It's not a new archetype, it's just the first time that we've talked about it in the meta review because it's finally in the top 8. So This one, I think, was kind of dragged down a little bit because of a couple of alternative builds, which haven't been performing as well. So this one, the reason why it made it into the top 8 is because of the prevalence of more people playing the Izzet Prowess deck. And when I say Izzet Prowess deck, I mean Izzet Cauldron, right? So when I talk about it in Best of 3, I'll do better about distinguishing between Izzet Prowess and Izzet Cauldron. But primarily, Izzet Prowess is Izzet Cauldron in Best of 1. You don't see as many of the actual Prowess decks in Best of 1, so I should just call it Izzet Cauldron. But just to clarify, the deck that I showcased last has grown in popularity, or at least some iteration of it. So this is a coin flip against Golgari midrange. It's weak against Azorius Control and Mono Black midrange and Dimir midrange. So the reason why it wasn't in the top 8 before was because Mono Black was more prevalent. Now that Mono Black has kind of dropped out a little bit, the Mono Green Landfall can sneak in. Obviously, you're going to have moments where you're coming up against a whole bunch of a certain archetype, which is why I talk about what is good against what, so that you can kind of pivot your strategy around based off of what you're experiencing on the ladder. For example, during my gameplay videos, Mono Red Goblins and Selesnya Rabbits was not doing very well in the bottom of Platinum because I kept coming up against sweepers, right? Like if you keep coming up against Azorius Control, maybe you don't want to run that sort of strategy, right? So, Mono Green Landfall is your opening hand, your best one. I think the card that really makes this whole thing shine is Mossborn Hydra, enabled by some of the other cards that we got in Final Fantasy, but I have already been killed by like a 256 Mossborn Hydra, right? It really punishes the decks that don't have the interaction to prohibit that sort of thing from happening. Another one that can just get completely out of hand is the Saw's Chocobo. And then Land of War Elves is pretty important because like if you can do a turn 3 Mossborn Hydra, get the thing going faster. It also helps for doing things like playing the Bristly Bill and then playing a land so that you can play your landfall triggers kind of on curve. Definitely worth getting the Land of War Elves in your opening hand if you can. Bristly Bill is another one that's really good to have it in your opening hand, and is the fourth one that I'm looking for to really lean into the counter synergy of this deck. And so I guess we should talk about it a little bit more because I've never talked about this one before, in case you've never come up against it, right? Some of them are playing more of like a giant growth strategy where you've got like you can hit this with like an overrun or something like that. Not overrun, the +3/+3 and trample and hexproof. You can then landfall to get Tifa to be in an insane spot. And then the traveling chocobo like makes all of your landfalls trigger an additional time. Spring Bloom Druid causes 2 landfall triggers. You've got the Ordeal of Nylea, which if you put it on a creature that already has a bunch of counters, like the Hydra, immediately triggers the double landfall when you go to attack. Bristly Bill can pay 5 to double the number of counters, and then also puts a +1/+1 counter every time that you're playing a land. And then you've got like Bushwhack for either hitting your land drops or fighting, and then hard-hitting Question for a little bit of interaction to slow your opponent's strategies down. And then Snakeskin Veil is to protect your Hydra, right? So, depending on the matchup, you're going to want to do like a turn 2 Hydra. In other circumstances, you're going to want to do a turn 4 Hydra where you can hold up the Snakeskin Veil to save it, depending if you're coming up against like Mono Black or something. So hope that helps. It's finally exciting to see a Mono Green deck in the top 8, and I hope we see that continuing into rotation. All right, Mono White Lifegain is all the way down in number 7 right now. Again, kind of depends on how much you're coming up against Mono Black midrange, because it is weak to that strategy. No changes to this list. It's kind of the stock list. Sarah Paragon's rotating. I think it can just be 2 Exemplars of Light. I think we're going to see this one post-rotation as well. It's favored against Izzet Prowess, Dimir Midrange, Golgari Midrange, Mono Green Landfall. It's weak against Mono Black Midrange and Azorius Control. It really does not rebuild well from the sweepers, and Mono Black Midrange has enough removal to make this deck struggle, which is why you have something like the Sarah Paragon or the Exemplar of Light to try to improve that matchup. So the opening hand, you're looking for the Leyline of Hope. This is another one we've had for quite some time, but Essence Channeler is a little bit better than the Ajani's Pridemate. And then we have the Hinterland Sanctifier and the Leonin Vanguard, both of which allow you to trigger pre-combat, whereas your Healer's Hawk and your Runelurker Bat trigger post-combat. So you still want one like a 1-drop that enables something to grow, right? If you've been a longtime fan of the channel, you may have noticed that this is not running like the Caves of Kolios or the Fountain Port. Some lists do include that to give the Essence Channeler the ability to damage yourself during your turn to give it flying and vigilance. It does not have a profound effect on the win rate. And Azorius Omniscience also made it into the top 8. So again, this is another one that's like a little bit of a sample size issue. We'll start to see if we were to continue to do this, we would see a little bit more of a settling of the top 8. But we're starting to get, like, as you notice, like, what, 6 out of 8 of the lists have been kind of determined and haven't been really changing around. So if we compare this one to the Azorius Omniscience before the ban, we can see that they basically replaced Abuela's Awakening with the Repair and Recharge. There's a couple of other changes, though. So, like, we're dropping a Spell Pierce. Some lists are running 3. We're dropping 2 Plains and a Darker Waste, 2 Darker Wastes. We're dropping 3 Temporary Lockdowns. So some lists will run the Temporary Lockdown on 3. This one, it depends on how many white sources you're going to run. If you drop the Temporary Lockdowns, then you can get away with being more mono blue. And this one is bringing in the Fabled Passages as well as the Meticulous Archive, so running the Surveil land as well as the Fetch land. And then, yeah, like I mentioned, the Repair and Recharge allows you to do the Abuela's Awakening on turn 5 instead of turn 4. It also doesn't come in as a 1/1, so if your opponent is holding something like Go for the Throat or Cut Down, it doesn't interact with it. So there's some like pros and cons. But it used to be tier 1. It used to be the best deck in best of 1, and now it's all the way down at number 8. So hitting your combo on turn 5 is much more detrimental than turn 4. Now, I want to get a little bit geeky right now and just talk about some of the game design part of it. So the way that Magic the Gathering is designed is you have an advantage that starts to occur being on the draw starting on turn 5. When that's like the tipping point. Aggro tries to win before turn 5, and then Control tries to win post. Midrange tries to go longer than aggro but get under Control, that sort of thing. But turn 5 is mathematically important for the way that the game is designed, because by turn 5, if you've played a land every single turn, the maximum amount of lands that you have mana available is 15, which, with the way that you curve out your deck, tends to be like the turn that you start to get your entire hand down, or at least you can if you're playing a low curve. So the fact that we have this, like, now it's a turn 5 deck instead of a turn 4 is mathematically important for the ultimate nerd, right? So we're going to see some of that in the cards that are now more important in the opening hand. And anyway, so it's favored against mono black midrange. It's been favored against mono black midrange forever, just by being the combo deck that it is. All of the interaction in mono black has nothing to shoot, especially now that you're bringing back the game-winning enchantment. That's not even a creature. It is also favored against the 4-color dinosaurs Jurassic Park Reanimator strategy, which, they're able to get their combo off on turn 4. It doesn't usually win the game on turn 4 unless they can hit the Invasion of Urgamon and do the Zombify on turn 3, and then you can disrupt the whole thing with Spell Pierce. Right? So, favored against that one. It's a coin flip against Azorius Control. That one kind of depends on whether or not they're able to land the counter spell on your Repair and Recharge, and this one is not running the land that prevents your spell from being countered. So you could kind of tweak this deck to be a little bit better against Azorius Control. It's weak against Izzet Prowess and Dimir Midrange, which are going to be able to kind of get in tempo fast enough, but then also be able to disrupt your combo. Izzet Prowess and Dimir Midrange both have the ability to play Spell Pierce, which can be bad if you're trying to do a turn 5 Repair and Recharge. So the best of 1 sideboard also got a little bit of a rework since we lost the This Town Ain't Big Enough. There's no reason to bring that loop in. So we're dropping one of those. We're dropping it into the Floodmaw, which was a way to cheaply bounce your opponent's stuff, or like if they had the Rest in Peace or the Ghost Vacuum, some sort of graveyard hate, into the Floodmaw was a pretty good response. And then dropping 1 Split Up. And we're bringing in Season of Weaving, which was originally the one, if you go far enough back, this was the one that was like kind of originally done in the combo in Best of 3, where you can bounce everything and then you can create a loop where you're able to play the Season of Weaving and play an Invasion of Arcavios and play Season of Weaving and just keep doing that. And create a little bit of this loop. And then so we've got 2 River Churn monuments as an alternative win condition. So if you are looping, you grab a River Churn monument and then you mill your opponent's half of your opponent's graveyard. It's a little bit worse off though, because like you don't have infinite mana, so you would still need to get up to like 8 mana to do this. So really you're just going to kill them with the Jeskai Revelation. The River Churn monument's there in case they have an answer for the Jeskai Revelation. So anyway, enough rambling about Azorius Omniscience. I'm sure you guys are all familiar with this combo deck. The opening hand, you're looking for the Omniscience. You're also looking for the Rolling Dragonstorm as a way to get the Omniscience into the graveyard, like Chart a Course. We also have Afara's Dispersal, which is still good against the aggro strategies. And then Temporary Lockdown, if you're running it, is a good one to have in your opening hand. Again, it kind of depends on the matchup. Since we're seeing more Azorius Control, then the Temporary Lockdown is not as good. But the ultimate nerd thing is that like the 4th one that I look for in the opening hand is Stock Up, and this is because you're drawing more cards. You'll notice Repair and Recharge isn't in the top 4, right? So like you should try to aim to draw into your Repair and Recharge rather than start with it in your opening hand. So that's the big difference between Abuelo's Awakening on 4 and Repair and Recharge on 5. So that it's just enough of a tipping point that Stock Up becomes better to have in your opening hand. For the ultimate nerds. And speaking about ultimate nerds, let's get into some best of 3. So we had the MTGO standard RC qualifier happen on Friday, July 11th. And so that's always exciting, right? I mean, I don't remember how many hundreds of players played it. But it's a pretty big tournament that we get to talk about this week. So if we compare this one, there were 4 different versions of Dimir Midrange last week. 5 actually, one of which was the exact same list, right? So lots of Dimir Midrange post-ban. I think it's one of the reasons why they didn't do the ban prior to the tournament is because it would have just all been Dimir Midrange. But anyway, this one is closest to the 4th version that we talked about last week. We're dropping a Cut Down, 2 Sheoldred's Edict, the 2 Saiba Cryptomancers, which Mogd was running, the 2 Phantom Interference, and the Tishana's Tidebinder to bring in Anoint with Affliction. Upside to this one is obviously that it exiles problematic threats like the Mosswood Dreadknight and Golgari Midrange. Spell Stutter, this one I think is nicer when... So Fabloom Trick, let me sequence this right. We're bringing in 4 copies of Fabloom Trick. This one is better against other Dimir midrange decks, and then if you're going to run a higher spell fairy density, then Spell Stutter does a little bit better by getting that additional 1 for each fairy that you control. So they kind of synergize, this one leaning most fully into the fairy synergies. And then we're also bringing in a single copy of the Nowhere to Run. The best of 3 sideboard, we've got 1 less Negate, 1 less Anoint with Affliction, 2 less Preacher of the Schisms, and 1 less Disdainful Stroke. And instead we're bringing in an additional copy of Duress. It probably has to do with mono white control, Azorius Control, that sort of thing. Jeskai Control we saw last week. So there is some control where you want additional copies of Duress. We've got 1 cut down in the sideboard for the aggro matchups. We want to bring in the 4th copy. Blot Out is a good one for getting rid of Kaidos and Enduring Curiosities in the mirror match. So you can bring that one in if you're up against other Dimir midrange. And then we have the, a 3rd copy of Spell Stutter in the sideboard, and then a Tishana's Tidebinder in the sideboard as well, depending on how much you're coming up against targets that are good for it. Like Dimir midrange can struggle against the Urbrask's Forge, for example. So you would bring in the Tishana's Tidebinder. And the Spell Stutters tend to be brought in against things like Temporary Lockdown, where your early kind of your tempo strategy of curving out into Kaido is being disrupted by something that you could then protect with the Spell Stutter. All right, second place. Sorry, I don't think I actually said who that was. First one was. That was Dimir Midrange by Patsy. Second place was Izzet Cauldron by Fulero. And last week we talked about kind of Izzet Prowess versus Izzet Cauldron. That still exists. There's 2 different decks. This one is... So there was 1 Izzet Cauldron deck last week, if I remember correctly. If we compare that one to last week, we see a very small change. So this one is dropping a single Abrade, keeping 1 in the main, and dropping a single into the Floodmaw to bring in 2 copies of the Fire Magic. And I think this has to do a little bit more with the go wide strategies like Boros Convoke seeing a little bit more traction this week. just being able to stifle those go wide strategies. So the best of 3 sideboard also got a slight tweak, so we've got one less Unable to Scream. We're seeing a little bit less Screaming Nemesis, so I think that's kind of why you're taking down the Unable to Scream. We're also dropping the Scorching Shot and replacing it with the Twin Maw Stormbrood, like we saw in the Pro Tour. I like that change quite a bit. We're dropping the Draconautics Engineer, and instead we're bringing in Chandra. And Chandra Spark Hunter is just like, they're both techs against Wraths, where you're trying to like, so with the Draconautics Engineer, you're answering with haste. With Chandra, you're answering it with a Planeswalker that doesn't get hit by the Wrath. It's pros cons, right? And then we also have the Disdainful Stroke. So this one, obviously, it's good if you're coming up against stuff that has a spell that's mana value 4 or greater. All right, Izzet Cauldron by Tuna K took down first place on the Saturday tournament, which was just a normal standard challenge. Still a decent tournament. I love watching it every week, or going through the results with you guys every week. So this one's dropping both copies of the Abrade. So if we compare this one to last week, both of the Abrades have been dropped for Torch the Towers. And similar to Anoint with Affliction, this one just showcases there's a little bit more of a need to exile some threats on turn 1 or turn 2. And then the best of 3 sideboard, we've got one less Abrade. All 3 copies of Unable to Scream have been ditched to bring in the Disdainful Stroke. So seeing both lists bring that one as a tech. One Tishana's Tidebinder, again, good against Planeswalkers and artifacts. And then the 2 additional copies of Fire Magic. This one deciding to keep it in the sideboard and bring it in if you are up against the go wide strategies. And Boros Convoke, yeah, Boros Convoke fans unite, right? We see a second place win by Will the Pill with Boros Convoke, and it is the exact same list that I covered last week. So if you want all of the details, I recommend you go watch that video. It's exciting to see because, this was basically everywhere pre-rotation last year, to the point where they were debating about whether or not to ban Knight Errant of Eos, and then it just like disappeared, right? I can't exactly remember why the Boros Convoke strategy entirely went off the map, but I think it was largely just because like Voldaren Epicure was just impossible to replace. Nessing Bot just like couldn't quite get there, and obviously this like deck struggles against mono red. So the last couple months have just been a lot of mono red. So that's partly why. But anyway, it's good to see Boros Convoke back. I'm a big fan of the archetype. All right, we have the second version of Dimir Midrange. This one was by the Dimir Midrange All-Star, Mogged, and went. So this was first place on the second tournament that happened on Saturday, July 12th, also a standard challenge. And if we compare it to Mogged's list from last week, we can see that must be nice to win 2 standard challenges back to back, right? Anyway, if we compare it to last week, we can see they made some tweaks to their list. So they dropped 1 copy of the Saiba Cryptomancer. The secret's out of the bag, right? The cat's out of the bag. People are now ready to play around it a little bit more. And then the single Phantom Interference, I think, dropping down one of those as well. And then dropping the single copy of the Deep Cavern Bat. So Mogged likes to just not have the Deep Cavern Bats, which some of you will really like. I know there's a lot of people out there who hate the Deep Cavern Bat. So bringing in 2 Anoint Afflictions, again, similar to the Torch the Towers, just being able to exile problematic threats from your opponent. And then you also have the additional copy of the Tishana's Tidebinder for the Planeswalkers, whether or not that's enemy Kaidos or the Planeswalkers in mono white control. And then the best of 3 sideboard, we have a Anoint with Affliction has been moved to the main, and we're bringing in the Fabloom Trick just as a single copy, I assume for the mirror match against other Dimir Midrange. And I'm pretty sure Mogged posts a really, really in-depth sideboard guide of like, here's how I won the standard challenge 2 weeks in a row on their Patreon, if I remember correctly. So you can look for them. Just Google Mogged, you'll find them on Twitter or whatever. So Izzet Prowess by Varo took down second place on the Saturday tournament. And this one is, although we're seeing more aspects of Agatha's Soul Cauldron sneak into the Izzet Prowess deck, this one is the Izzet Prowess deck because it leans more heavily into playing spells and triggering the Planisphere. So this week, if we compare it to last week, we see the Thundering Falls is gone, we see that Meringue River region's gone, One copy of Magic Damper's gone. So there's these little one-ofs, little tweaks here and there to bring in an additional copy of the Agatha Soul Cauldron, because honestly, I think the Izzet Cauldron deck is stronger than the Izzet Prowess deck post-bans. We'll see. And then bringing in 2 more islands. So just deciding that, you know, we need a little bit more mana to get all of our ops and sleight of hands to work. So the best of 3 sideboard, you're dropping, Varro dropped 2 Spell Pierce, an Agatha Soul Cauldron, and the Meringue River Regent, and brought in 2 Braids. So this is good against other Cauldron decks. Ral Crackling Wit is the answer to the mono-white sweepers, playing the Planeswalker. And then we have the Twin Maw Stormbrood, which is a, you know, good way to destroy any problematic blocker. Oh my god, I did it again. Like the 2/4 Death Toucher in mono black, right? There's a couple of 4 and 5 toughness creatures that can really slow down the tempo of this deck. I don't know why my brain blanks on that every single time. You guys know what I'm talking about, though. Okay, so Mono Green Landfall by Shulk, which I really hope is She-Hulk, Sea-Hulk, S-Hulk. Anyway, took down first place on the Standard Challenge on Sunday, July 13th. So, Mono Green, let's go! Mono Green making it into the top 8 in Best of 1, and then also in Best of 3. So, very similar lists, honestly. So, like, this one's not running the enchantment that triggers the landfall, just because in Best of 3, you have to be careful about glass cannon strategies that your opponent can sideboard against, and an enchantment like that makes you more likely to get 2-for-1'd by your opponent's interaction or removal. So, not including that one. But we see, you know, a couple things like Saz that we haven't seen in the Best of 1 list. We've got a little, like, the Royal Treatment for an additional, you know, resiliency against your opponent's interaction and removal, leaning fully into the Bushwhack instead of kind of the split between the fight spells, but largely the same deck that we see in Best of 1. And yeah, really cool to see it, you know, snag a first place, especially because, like, the Sunday tournament is a reasonably sized tournament. So Pop Hatch Recruit helps out against interaction from your opponent. Pick Your Poison is like the Edict side of Pop Hatch formation. It's cheaper, it's 1 sorcery instead of an instant for 2. Both giving you artifact, enchantment, you know, creatures with flying. Used to be the answer against Atraxa if you go a little far enough back. 2 copies of Soul Guide Lantern give the deck a little bit of graveyard hate. Same with the Scavenging Ooze. Insidious Fungus gives us artifact and enchantment hate. Rin and Realm Breaker gives us the ability to trigger landfalls a little bit better, being able to kind of mill and then grab a land. It's another one that, like, if you're coming up against Wraths, gives you a little bit of that Planeswalker resiliency to sweepers. The third and the fourth copy of Saz, I think you're going to bring this in against decks that struggle a little bit with the interaction. I haven't played this deck well enough to know exactly when you would bring in the third and fourth copy of Saz. So if you are a mono green expert, please share with the community what you know about when you would bring these in. And then Nissa Ascended Animus is along with Ren and Realmbreaker. You're going to bring in against, like, board-centric control, like mono white. And you're also going to bring it in against decks that struggle against the artifact and enchantment hate. All right, and the last and final list here is Izzet Cauldron by Universe. Took down second place on Sunday, and if we compare this one to the list we just covered in this very video, we see that they dropped a single copy of the Voldaren Thrillseeker. In my Best of 1 video, you may have noticed that I dropped all of the copies of the Voldaren Thrillseeker. Depends on how heavily you want to lean into winning off of the combo, as opposed to just tempoing out your opponent. We're also dropping a Thundering Falls, we're dropping 1 Tersa Light Shatter, and we're dropping 1 of the Glacial Dragon Hunts. And instead we're bringing in the Abrade to help out against killing the other Cauldron decks, which have become a little bit more popular. We've got 1 Shore Up to give us a little bit of resiliency against the removal. We've got Wild Ride, which you know, is pretty spicy. The fact that it gives you haste can really help you swing in on these crazy turns. And then also increases the power of Vivi quite well, right? And then we're running it at 1 additional island. So the Best of 3 sideboard, we're dropping a Negate, Lithomatic Barrage, a Spell Pierce, a Tishana's Tidebinder, a Scorching Shot, and the 2 Enduring Curiosities, as well as the 2 Draconautics Engineers. So I would say probably the most substantial sideboard rework. And we're bringing in an additional copy of the Disdainful Stroke. Again, I'm not 100% sure which matchups you're going to bring this in, because, like, you're not bringing it in against Izzet Cauldron, right? You're You're not bringing it in against Dimir Midrange, I don't think, because that one's Kaido and Enduring Curiosity. I guess Enduring Curiosity is on 4. So anyway, curious. Let me know in the comments below what you'd like to bring in Disdainful Stroke for. And then, because like we don't really see a lot of domain right now. Anyway, and we've got 2 copies of a Braid, so you'd bring this one if you're up against an artifact deck. 2 copies of Fairy Mastermind here is to offset if your opponent is trying to win through draw. So Fairy Mastermind, I like bringing it in against like Dimir Midrange. And then we've got the Torch the Tower. This one's for against aggro matchups, anything that struggles a little bit with that single point interaction. Also gets rid of something like Mosswood Dreadknight. Unable to Scream, if you are coming up against something like Screaming Nemesis, Unable to Scream is a nice answer for that. And then we've got the 1 copy of the Twin Moss Stormbrood to be the Scorching Shot that's easier to cast. So thanks for listening to my ramblings. I hope they find you well. I hope they give you a good, solid footing to start your journey into destroying it in best of 1 or best of 3. If you have any questions, let me know. Again, I'm here to help. I love helping beginners. I love talking to veterans who have played the game for as long as I have. So I love talking to veterans who have played the game longer than I have too. So yeah, anyway, good luck with your RCQs. Good luck climbing the ladder. Let's see, this will be the last best of 1 review. I think next week I'll just be focusing on the Edge of Eternity's pre-release. So again, thanks for listening to my ramblings as always. Oh, also, just, I know I always plug it here at the end, but thank you to those who are my YouTube members. It is the best way to help support this. If you enjoy this every week, do consider becoming a YouTube member. It's only a couple bucks a month. And if I can get enough numbers on the YouTube members, I can justify doing this longer. Because as I get older, it becomes harder to justify the amount of time that this sort of thing takes. So but I do enjoy doing it. It's not something that like I need you to do to help save the channel kind of thing. I just appreciate those who have done it, and so thank you. And have a wonderful week. I will catch you all, let's see, probably this Friday for the pre-release guide for Edge of Eternities, something like that. Anyway, take care.